When you're young, a lot of times, especially for young men, we don't take things as seriously as maybe they are in everyday life. And a very stark reality was brought to me when I was young. I was 20, 21 years old. Someone I knew well, Billy Petrielli, he went by Butch, had grown up on Taylor Street, the same neighborhood I'm from, and his family originated in the same village that my father grew up in, and my grandfather and my godfather, just east of Rome in a region called Abruzzi. And in Abruzzi, it doesn't get the fame that Rome gets because of the culture and whatnot, but Abruzzi is where probably the most vicious mob guys come out of, especially the ones that wind up in the United States. And that stems from poverty and whatnot. Well, Billy, who later took on the name Butch for whatever reason, I'm not sure, was a collector, much like I followed in his footsteps as a collector. I followed in his footsteps most of my young life. And Butch worked with a crew of bad guys that were known as the Wild Bunch. And their forte was to take other people that were involved in crime, and they would collect street tax. And so what would happen is if you were loaning money, gambling, whatever, they would go and tax you your 25% and bring the money back. Well, as it turns out, Butch decided to start keeping some of that money. And what he wasn't privy to was that his main partner, Harry Alleman, who was another hitman for the mob, his uncle was Joey Ferriola, who, as it turns out, was the number 2 in command of the mob for a long time. And so when Harry went to jail, but Butch didn't, the ritual is that we collect money and we set a certain amount aside for the guys that have gone to jail or incapacitated, whatever. And so I was summoned to a warehouse in an area called Bridgeport, which is predominantly Irish. I learned later that there's a reason why they did it in an Irish neighborhood. And I didn't think anything of it. But when I got there with my cousin Dino, we saw Butch, and we saw Rocco and Felice, and we saw Al Taco, bosses, big bosses. And they were there with Ferriola. And so it's obvious something's going on, but we thought maybe Butch was being elevated. So when they started to talk to Butch, it became apparent Butch was in trouble, a lot of trouble. And a fellow named Frank Calabrese, who was a known muscle for the mob, walked up behind him, just as cool as the other side of the pillow, and threw a half-inch rope around his neck and pulled it tight. And when he pulled it tight, Arturo LaPietra, who ran that section of the city, took a acetylene torch and lit it while we stood there and watched, and proceeded to burn his. And he wiggled and tried to get loose, but Calabrese is a big, strong guy. He burned his, and then he slowly worked his way up the body. And as this guy's screaming bloody murder, he proceeds to burn his face. He's burning his eye sockets, burns his mouth, pushes it as the lips burn off, and burns the tissue from his mouth until he's basically melting. And as he slowly stopped screaming, and you could tell that he was probably about to die, Frank Calabrese with a straight razor. They let him go limp. Then another fellow who I didn't know, nice-sized butcher knife, stabbed him 3 times in the heart. Put him in a sleeping bag, and they carried him out to the car. And it was at that point, my aha moment in the mob hit me like a ton of bricks. This is what happens when you break these rules. So they took Butch's body and they put it in a sleeping bag and they put it in the back of his car and intentionally drove it to another neighborhood, which is all Mexican, behind where the county jail is in Chicago. And they just left him there. And this happened in like December. They didn't find him until like March. So by now he's stanky. Just rotted corpse. Some civilian just happened to smell him, tapped on the glass, saw a lump, called the police. Police came and said, fuck. So that's where Butch went. But the reality and the realization that when you fuck up, this is what happens, regardless of your connections. Because Butch was a riser, man. He was doing good. He was bringing in a lot of money. But you don't steal from family. And it was from that point forward I realized that no matter how crazy I am with my personal income, money that belonged to people above me, to the penny, had to be right. It wasn't long after that I was sent to Philadelphia to pick up a lot of money. Wound up getting ambushed, shot 5 times because the money bag was light when we came back. It wasn't light on purpose. It just happened. But rules are rules. And as that realization sets in with you, paranoia sets in. And what you see in the movies, when you see in Goodfellas, when everybody's patting each other on the back, what they're really thinking is this fucker going to shoot me in the back of my head? You never ride in the front seat of a car. You never go up the escalator first. You always make sure you're the back of the line, not the front, for anything, because that's exactly how it happens. And watching Butch Petrielli get burned to death and then slit and then stabbed, the brutal reality that these are family members and friends that you've known your whole life, there's nothing you can do. You can't even say anything. You just have to follow what you're told to do. As time went on and I collected money, the use of violence is really a last resort, because once you hurt somebody, then they're not going to pay you. They're going to run to the cops. So unless you're willing to kill them, you really don't want to put your hands on them. One different situation in that regard, there's a guy, he's a mob guy, but he owned trucks. A lot of trucking business, a lot of bars, a lot of restaurants in the Chicago outfit. A guy named Jimmy Pellegrino was also dealing drugs on the side, which is a big no-no. The Chicago mob is very tight about no drugs, certain other rules that New York, Philadelphia condone. We don't, we condemn it. And Jimmy Pellegrino was in cahoots with who ultimately became infamous through my life, the cop, Steve Manning. And the deal was that Jimmy was giving Steve money, and Steve was ripping off and killing these drug dealers, the Puerto Rican drug dealers on the northwest side of the city. And he was taking the cocaine that he was stealing and selling it to Jimmy for what was fair market value. And then one time, Steve decided to just rip Jimmy off, because what could he do? He can't shoot a fucking cop. And so Jimmy started to squawk about it. And, hey man, you got me for 38 grand. I want my money back. In the 80s, that's a lot of money. And so Steve Manning said, okay, I'll make it right. I'll tell you what, give me some more money. I'm going to get you 3 keys for the price of 2. And we're going to make it all right. So when all this was going down, I knew Jimmy. I knew all the players involved in this case. And so, as it turned out, Jimmy wanted a follow car when he went to meet with Steve. And so when he went to meet with Steve, he met him down on the southwest side of the city, down where he was from. And they got out of the car, it's nighttime, and they went behind a closed fast food restaurant, not a national chain, just a local joint. And Steve pretended to drop his keys. And when Jimmy bent down to pick up the keys, Steve shot him right in the back of the head. Pop, pop. Jack in the box, out goes the weasel. Jimmy's dead like Fred. And Steve had the balls to take his money and just leave him. And then Steve drove away, we drove away, and then Steve made a U-turn. Now, I know these guys, so we made the U-turn too. I didn't know what he was doing, but maybe, we're supposed to help. We're there to help. He wraps him up in a tarp, puts a towel around his head so he doesn't bleed too much in the tarp, and threw in the trunk of his own car, drove his car all the way to the north side of the city, and dumped him over the Lawrence Avenue Bridge into the Des Plaines River. Just easy breezy, like it was nothing. And then Steve turns to us and says, let's go get a pizza. And we were like, oh, fuck no, man, Jimmy's our friend. He's like, come on, man, I'm fine. So we went to Home Run Inn. And literally, to watch this guy eat, like it was nothing, after just popping somebody he'd known for years, in my mind, started the divide between, am I really in the right line of work, or do I just love the money so much I'm going to stick with it? And it was that realization at that moment that at any moment, for any reason, it could be you. That's one of the reasons mob guys never carry a lot of cash. In the old days, in the 50s and 60s, we always hid it under our carpets. And then with the advent of different ways to hide it, we washed it through various businesses. But you got too much cash and somebody needs it, guess what? That's it.
Even though Soft White Underbelly consists of a lot of videos, it's really still a photography project to me. And if you appreciate the photography, sometimes it's difficult to enjoy it when it's scrolling down the screen, which is the only option I had in this horizontal format on YouTube. So last year we came out with the first Soft White Underbelly book, which is a collection of the best portraits from the thousands of interviews I've done. Each portrait in this book is accompanied by an interesting quote from the person's interview.
Oh my God.
There's more.
Wow. These aren't as bad as I thought.
I look like a witch.
I will not be reprinting this book when it sells out. So once it's gone for good. You can order yours at softwhiteunderbelly.org. $125, $150 for a signed copy. And thank you for watching.
Turns out Steve Manning, same guy, had a fake jewelry store. He had multiple storefront businesses around the city. He's a cop. He had whatever he wants. Chicago cop. So he had a fake jewelry store. And he was sent out to Vegas to get some money from Vegas. Back in those days, Tony Spilotro ran Las Vegas. They since made a movie about it called Casino. And so Steve, the cop, can get on an airplane with his badge. He just doesn't even check in. He carries his gun with him. So he goes out to get like $250,000. So his share is going to be 50 for bringing it back. And he went with a guy named Ricky Randazzo. And so on the way back, they found Ricky's head in the desert outside Las Vegas. His body wound up in a duffel bag, and they burned it in the jewelry store. They had a melting oven so they could melt down jewelry, and they just systematically I'm watching them, put the arms in, put the hands in, put the legs in. Torso was wrapped real tight with cellophane, kind of stunk when the plastic burned. They shoved them right in that furnace. And it wasn't a big opening, but they kept shoving the body parts in until it was all burnt up, scraped them up. It's like cremation. They took it, put it in a plastic bag, took it out on a boat, and dumped it in Lake Michigan. Later on, as it turns out, Steve was shaking down some of the strip club owners on the southwest side of the city, which is ultimately what got him, after I got him out of prison, behind the testimony that I was involved in, got him back out of prison. He went right back to it, had his restaurant storefront, northwest side, up in an all-Swedish neighborhood called Andersonville. And the restaurant wasn't a restaurant, it was just a storefront. But in the basement, they had a meat grinder. And it's like a garbage disposal, but industrial. And literally watched him take 2 separate bodies, shot in the head, and stuff them like a wood chipper as this thing was grinding and grinding and grinding. And the parts were just going into like meatloaf. Garbage bagged them up. Chicago River, here we go. Pulled up on the South Street Bridge, pulled over. And he literally just dumped them in the river like it was nothing. Pulled away, and that was the end of that. And one time I asked him, I said, dude, how do you sleep at night? He's like, it doesn't bother me. He says, beautiful house in Hoffman Estates. I got a condo downtown on the lake. It's just business. And then I came to realize that I was sleeping well at night too, which really started to trouble me. Am I a psychopath? Am I just incapable of rationing right and wrong? But the reality is, if that's what you grew up with, that's what you know. And if that's what you know, sleeping at night's not hard. Eating right afterwards wasn't really that hard. It's not something you go home and tell your wife and kids about, but it's just what you do for a living. That's your occupation. And it was not that big of a deal. So for me personally, the telltale moment that I was in the wrong line of work and that I needed to start backing out slowly, very slowly. There was a guy in Chicago named Alex Dana. And Alex Dana owns the Rosebud Restaurant Group. The Rosebud, Carmine's, very successful restaurants. Phil Stefano's, he bought him out. Very successful places in Chicago. And Alex Dana was a big restaurateur, but he was also gangstered up. And so I don't even know what the transgression was, but his guy, a cop, that would go from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant and take the zipper bags of money, bring them all to the corporate office, was an asshole, and nobody liked him. But he pissed off somebody, and I later found out that it was Rocco and Felice, who was out in Cicero, but he was one of the main guys in the Chicago mob for his entire life. And something had happened between them, and I got the phone call. And he said, I want you to take Nicky Gio, who was a good friend of ours, my age, and my cousin Dino and myself. And they said, don't kill him, but hurt him. And so we knew where the corporate office was, where he took all the money. And so we sat out there on a Sunday morning after he'd make his rounds, and we were there early, like at 4 o'clock in the morning, because you never knew what time, because he never ran the same route twice. So I had a golf club, I had a chipping wedge, and Nicky Gio had a bat, and My cousin Dino had a bat, but it was sawed off. And so this prick pulls up. He's got a Cadillac that he didn't pay for. Went to Joe Perillo, a mob guy that owns a car dealership. And this dumbass comes out, and he's got these bags, and he's swinging them like a kid swings a doll coming out of the laundromat. And as he's walking the 100 yards from his car to the front door, he's reaching in his pocket for his keys, and that was the moment. And I sprinted up behind him with the chipping wedge, and I caught him right in the forehead. Bink! And when it shot his head back, he got hit like 2 or 3 times with the bats. But on my second swing, when I went to swing into him, into his head, the chipping wedge got caught behind his ear, and I couldn't get the fucking thing out. And I'm shaking his head, and his head's bobbing around, and blood and cottage cheese are going everywhere. And I keep trying to get the fucking chipping wedge out of his head, and it's just not coming out. So I just say, fuck it. So I just start jiggling it as hard as I possibly can, because I figure if nothing else, I'm going to scramble his brains. So I'm pushing this fucker as far as I can behind his ear. I'm jerking it and back and forth and back and forth. Shit's flying everywhere. And so once it was obvious he was unconscious, I just dropped the chipping wedge and left it there. And it was still in his head. I remember looking back, and I don't know why, because I didn't even have beef with this guy, but I went, I spit on him. And it just made me feel like, okay, that's it. I've met my burden. From this point on, I'm just not doing this shit anymore. It's money, but no more violence. Because I didn't even know this prick. He could have been a good family guy when he got home. He could have loved his kids. I didn't know. But when you're told to do it, you robotically do it. And if you don't do it, you get it. And so it was at that moment that I realized that my life in the Chicago mob, you can't just run away, but you slowly ease out. Start taking less assignments to go out of town. Stop doing the things that could wind up in the newspapers. And I still worried that maybe I was psychopathic, because it didn't bother me one bit. Like, not at all. I mean, I kind of felt bad that the guy might be orphaning some kids or widowing a wife, but at the end of the day, I didn't know. Didn't know his kids. So it's just business. So along the way, we eventually get indicted, and we all go to court. And in federal court, we get convicted of the RICO statute, which is a racketeering influence corruption organization. And the RICO statute was built to break up the mob by Robert Kennedy. And because they couldn't get individual crimes, if they could get 5 or more people to conspire to commit a crime on tape or somehow through testimony, then they could convict you as a consortium instead of as an individual, and then that was a mandatory life sentence. So there I'm sitting, dealing with that in the county jail and in the federal lockup, depending on which court I was going to. And the FBI approached me through a series of events. I wound up in a strange office, and I'm talking to Tom Gankars of the FBI, and I know not to tell him anything, but one thing leads to another, and I wind up wearing the wire against the dirty Chicago cops, which were really their targets. They already had the mob guys, but nobody could infiltrate the cops. But since I had known Steve and Gary Engel and the guys that crew so well, and I would go with them to do the crimes like the Jimmy Pellegrino murder, since I knew everybody, the FBI knew that they would talk openly in front of me without hesitation. So I wear the wire. They get indicted not just for the Chicago crimes, but Kansas City crimes, Miami crimes, Las Vegas crimes. They get indicted for all sorts of shit. And so I testify. I testify in all these trials in different parts of the country. And the cops all wind up with the death penalty in at least one jurisdiction, but then hundreds of years everywhere else for whatever litany of participation they had in these various events. And then it came time to go into witness protection. And in the middle of the night, one night, unbeknownst to me, untold to me, they swooped down on my wife and my 2 young sons, very young sons, and essentially just took the house, put them in the back of a U.S. Marshal's car, and drove them to an airport and flew them to Washington, D.C., to a place where there's no windows, no outside contact, nothing, for like 30 days. And while they sat in there, I didn't know where they were. They could have been alive or dead, I didn't know. But it didn't take long to understand that the marshals don't play from the bureaucratic standpoint. But as it applies to the custody standpoint, I still had 6 more months to do because of the deal I'd worked out for my cooperation. I went to a witness unit down in Phoenix, Arizona. It's a prison, but it's really a hotel, and it's plush. You eat whatever you want. They give you enough money to buy your own groceries. Nobody touches your food but you. You cook it yourself. That way nobody's getting poisoned in there. And then the day comes where they come to you. You know what day you're going home. And you don't know where you're going. They lay out a big map. And they say, okay, you can't go here because you broke the law here. And you can't go here because you broke the law there. And by the time you're done pinpointing all the states you've broken the law, you're down to fucking Idaho, Montana, whatever. So they send my dumb ass to Houston, Texas, where I fit in like never. So I get off the airplane and my marshal's standing there like a fucking goofball. Tall, gangly cowboy with bow legs and wearing a leisure suit. And like the moment we saw each other, it's like, I fucking hate this guy. And he felt the same way. And so it was like a life of fucking mental misery. He wanted me to go to work a 9-to-5 job, be a square, make minimum wage, don't do anything too crazy, don't dress nice, no more suits. You're going to wear untucked polo shirts and Dickies pants. It was horrible, fucking horrible. But the reality is they do all that, not to keep us safe. They fucking hate us, we're rats. They do it so that when the time of reckoning comes for these cops to go to their trial, when they march us into the courtroom, 4 marshals in front of us, 2 usually got shotguns, long arms of some sort. There's usually 1 on either side of us and 2 behind us. And they march you in like a fucking, like a army parade in front of Castro in Cuba. And they sit you on the witness stand and they all stand behind you like this. Like who the fuck's gonna hurt you in a courtroom? Nobody. Like what are you gonna do? Throw a paper wad at you or crumpled paper? Nothing. But the jury is now so afraid of the defendant that he's fucked. That's why witness protection is in existence. Because nobody stays in it. Nobody. You get out, they give you $5,000, which you've already got in your pocket anyway. You stash money all over the country while you're going through the court process. But they give you $5,000, they wipe you completely clean. Like if somebody tried to do a deep dive on me, you're not going to find out shit. And that's just the way it goes. The old me, fingerprints are gone, Social Security history is gone, everything, medical records gone, U.S. military's gone, everything's gone. And they issue this new shit. And then you got to go out and find a job with a Social Security number that's 3 days old and you're fucking 40 years old. And you go to an employer and say, hey, I've only had a Social Security card for 3 days, but maybe you trust me and hire me. It's laughable. But the marshals don't fucking care. All they care about is that dog and pony show come court day. And it's, the budget for that is insane. I was involved in a trial that I was subpoenaed by a lawyer in Chicago who represented, after Steve Manning came off of his death row case through the appellate process, not because I erred, but because the judge allowed the wife of Jimmy Pellegrino to say some things about Steve Manning that weren't part of the record. So he gets a new trial. I refuse to testify. He gets sprung. So he hires some civil rights attorneys. They sue the FBI. I get subpoenaed to testify. And in the process of testifying in this case, the ultimate verdict was that Steve Manning gets $6.5 million, which is like insane. But that's how the system works. I mean, it's just how it works. But I had to testify to just, what did they give me? Like, what did the FBI give me to testify against these people? They let you have sex whenever you want when you're incarcerated. They clear out the FBI office and you can bring whoever you want up there. Guys are allowed to bring whatever they want back into the jail. As a matter of fact, until you're officially in WITSEC, in witness protection, the FBI handles you. But once you're officially in WITSEC, once you're official Department of Justice witness protection, then the marshals take over. And it's like it's free for all. And so we sat there and literally with a paper and a pen on the witness stand, started calculating how much they pay you. And it was about $250,000. To me, personally, about $250,000. Not to mention all the dog and pony shit, buying my family a new house, getting them new cars, getting our new identity. It had to be at least $500,000, if not $1 million, for one trial. And that's where your tax dollars go, in the name of justice. Kind of fuck it up.
Fascinating life you've lived.
Huh?
Fascinating life you've lived.
You have no idea. I mean, you have no, dude, I got bullet holes all over me. I got stab wounds all over me.
Do you regret letting that, leading that life?
No, because it led me to where I am now.
You're happy?
No one's going to catch me slipping. Never going to happen.
You showed up here with 4 bodyguards.
I'm well protected. And I'm pretty good at defending
Because you're
myself.
worried about the cops as well as the mob, right?
I'm more worried about the cops.
Is the mob still even existent in
Oh,
Chicago?
yeah, they're alive and well.
Yeah.
But they refined their skill set because cash isn't king anymore. Now it's all credit, so you got to figure out how to tax credit. And that's harder to do. Paper dollars, you put them in a bag and walk away with them. But it's the cops you got to worry about. The cops I put away are so old, they're incapacitated. But they all got, because nepotism in the Chicago PD, I mean, that's the only way you're going to get hired, right? Aside from affirmative action. And so what happens is their nephews, sons, grandsons are now cops. And if the wrong cop sees me bouncing down the street, which, by the way, I look immensely different than I did in those days. I'll show you a picture later. But, yeah, the wrong cop catches me, I'm catching one in the head. So I stay clear of Taylor Street. You ever go to Taylor Street?
I've been there many times. LSB.
Okay, so you got Taylor, right? 2 blocks south is Roosevelt.
Yeah.
2 blocks north is the Congress Expressway.
Yeah.
So I'm 1 block north on Flournoy. You got Racine. 1 block east is May. So I am on Flournoy and May. So basically Taylor and Racine. I'm a diagonal 1 block away.
Yeah.
That's where I grew up my whole life.
It's a great neighborhood.
They've gentrified it a lot. The area they used to call Jewtown, Maxwell Street, all wiped out. All wiped out. Now, I'm not supposed to tell anybody, but I've been back. But when I went back, dude, I went in the dead of winter on purpose, scarfed up, sunglasses, hat, hoodie. Like you would have never known it was me. But I rode through Jewtown, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It's complete. It's UIC now. They bought up all their property.
Yeah.
What else you want to know?
That's it. That's all I need to know. That's a lot.
All right.
It's a hell of a story.
Can I tell you, I brought those papers that day, right?
Yeah.
And you're busy. Now I understood in retrospect why you didn't want to see them. Everything I've told you is documented through the court records. Every single thing.
Yeah.
There's not one thing I've told you that varies in any way from what I've already testified to and passed polygraphs on. So,
You're a great storyteller.
well, I hope you make a lot of money. I hope you make a lot of money. Dude, you're a good guy. I want to tell you, I was trepidatious in the beginning because I'm not Johnny Handsome, right? I'm just a guy. And
You're a good-looking dude.
no, I'm just a guy. I'm balding. I battled cancer now for a while. Other things have gone on in my life. I've lost everybody. Mom, dad, brother, everybody's dead. So I'm going to tell you, I'm just a guy. And at this point in life, I don't give a fuck who knows my story. Like, what are you going to do? You're not going to run up on me and beat my ass. That ain't going to happen. If you shoot me, I'm going to die eventually. So I'd rather die quickly to a bullet than slowly to prostate cancer. It's a better way to go.
All right. Tommy Dye, thank you so much.
Thank you, man. You've been like super hospitable.
I make it easy for you.
You did.